debate today. We've heard passionate arguments both in support of our continue at sea deterrent, but we've also heard very passionate arguments against. Whilst I obviously, from my own perspective, do support those strong arguments that have been made by Right Honourable and Honourable Members for our deterrent, whilst I completely disagree with those who oppose it, I do completely respect the fact that they have stuck to their principled views. Before addressing some of the points raised today, I think it would be useful to remind ourselves of the continuing rationale for our independent nuclear deterrent. Following its July summit in Brussels, NATO made clear that, and I quote, "As long as nuclear weapons exist, this will remain a nuclear alliance. The UK's independent strategic nuclear force, together with that of France, play a vital deterrent role and contribute significantly to the overall security of the alliance. These allies' separate centres of decision-making contribute to the deterrence by complicating the calculations of potential adversaries. We recognise the common threats and our common purpose in facing them down. It is ultimately by standing together that we strengthen our deterrence and shore up the rules-based international order. That is what underpins NATO's nuclear umbrella. So, turning to the points that were raised in the debate today, the front bench spokesman asked me to answer a couple of questions, particularly on financing. As she will know, and has just been mentioned, we have the £10 billion contingency. Through that, we have been bringing forward parts of the project early so that we can try and get in as much time as possible and bring in those cost savings where necessary. And of course, we are working closely with all of the industry in there to make sure that this is delivered on time. My right honourable friend meets with the Treasury regularly, and the Treasury fully understand the importance of our nuclear deterrence. On Brexit, again, the Ministry of Defence continues to meet regularly with our suppliers to ensure that they have robust plans, whatever the outcome of the negotiations are, and that work is extensive. And on the warhead, work continues to transition. We continue to refine the options and the technical solutions that will inform the final government decision, but bearing in mind that the replacement is not required really until the late 2030s or possibly even later. My right honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, I have heard him advocate for many years the importance of our nuclear deterrent, and he always puts those points extremely effectively. And he rightly pointed out the support that exists for it in this House with the votes that have taken place on numerous occasions, and then rightfully reflected the nation's support for our deterrent, with some two-thirds of the population supporting it. Now, the honourable member for Glasgow South, if I remember rightly, started talking or quoting about big willies and little willies. I think I'm not going to go there personally. But he also said that this was a backslapping exercise. And I have to say, I think many members on both sides of the House found that a bit out of order. This is certainly not about backslapping, because the first job of any government is the defence of our nation. This debate is about marking the gratitude of those who have made sure that our country has remained safe. And as others have said already and pointed out, particularly my right honourable friend for Sevenoaks and the honourable lady for Bridgend, that NATO is a nuclear alliance, and therefore there are conflicts in the position that the SNP have made. No, I'm still referring to the points that he's been making, so if he'll just give me some time. He also raised the issue of decommissioning and the NAO report. Now, I acknowledge, and so does the report, that this is a very complex issue, complex in nature. I personally accept that this is something that's gone on for too long, but it also recognises that actually the Department and the Government are making initial steps in this, and this is something that I'm personally taking an interest in. Following several meetings I've had with the Honourable Member for Plymouth Devonport, for Rosyth and for Berwick-upon-Tweed, it is something that I will continue to work with. I should just make very clear that in August we completed the demonstrator phase with Swiftsure, and we are now commencing with resolution. So we are working on a plan. First government to do so, I have to say, for many years. I'll quickly take his intervention.
That's fair enough, and I hope he does make progress. No one wants to see that more than me. But can I just take him back to the point he raised on the Scottish National Party position on NATO? An independent Scotland's place in NATO is supported by none other than the former UK ambassador to NATO, Dame Marriott Leslie, who was ambassador during the time of the coalition. She's right, isn't she?
Yeah. But it feels that the Scottish National Party want to be protected by nuclear weapons but have no responsibility for them whatsoever. No, I have very... No, in fairness, there were lots of speakers. I want to get through them all. And actually, we've heard quite a lot from the honourable gentleman today. The right honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, the member for Sevenoaks, rightly reminds us that the deterrent is used every day. To say that it is not used is really quite an insult to all those who work so hard on our behalf, and reminded us of the growing threat that we see, not least from Russia, but also from North Korea. And talked about the importance of maintaining that independence for our country. The Honourable Lady for Bridgend, I thought, made a very valid point about reminding ourselves about the importance of NATO to us and the importance of our deterrent being an at-sea deterrent. That fact that it is hidden is a very important aspect of keeping our adversaries guessing, as it were. My honourable friend, my right honourable friend, who held the position I have, as he is someone I have great admiration for, and he is clearly respected right across industry, and particularly with his recent report. I'll come on to a bit of prosperity later. The honourable member for Durham North, the right honourable member for Durham North, quite rightly recognised that there is a commitment to the NPT, and I think this is a really important element, that we are wanting to see a reduction in nuclear weapons. It's how we go about it, and I would also say to him that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, never fears in fighting the corner for us when it comes to the Treasury. The honourable member for Argyll and Bute said that the future of Faslane would be safe in an independent Scotland. That's a very big statement for them to make without a nuclear enterprise. It would be a cause of great concern, I'm sure, for the 127 Scottish companies who are in the supply chain that generates business for them of £130 million. And also, I'd be wondering how many of our service personnel would actually want to serve in Scotland when they tax them so much. It is only thanks to the mitigation of this government that we are being able to help those. My honourable friend, I want to get through these responses. This isn't just this. I know. Whenever we do these debates, the Scottish National Party try and disrupt the closing speeches. I have given way to the honourable gentleman once, and I will carry on. My honourable friend, the member for Berwick-upon-Tweed, yes, she is wearing the Submariner's sweater. We're very proud of it. But she spoke eloquently about the detailed day-to-day experiences of those servicemen and women. I have to say, having been on one of those submarines, I'm not sure, frankly, and I'll be honest, that I could do it. The thought of being in that confined space for that long a period of time is something that I always admire. But what I have to say is what strikes me is how proud and how much those service personnel love doing that role. The honourable member for Barrow, who has been a long advocate of this, he's held many events in the House over recent years, rightly talked about the workers in Barrow and the huge contribution they're making to this national exercise. And of course, that means that we should recognise all parts of the country. Particularly, I know that the honourable member for Plymouth Devonport rightly wants to point out the contribution that is being made there for the continuous at sea deterrent. And the honourable member for Barrow mentioned the medal campaign. Well, he will have heard my right honourable friend say that this is an issue he will look into, and I'll make sure that we do that as quickly as possible. My right honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh, he also talked about his experience going on board, and again I would repeat the points that I made about admiring the people who work on those services. And the honourable member for Worley quite rightly reminded us of the modern-day threats, not just in intentions, but also the capability that is being built up by many of our adversaries, and it's important that we do that. And also quite rightly reminded us that many campaigners will talk about the weapons that are on, perhaps, that we have pointing in one direction, but never referring to the weapons that may be pointing to us. The honourable member, I think, for Gedling actually made strong and powerful points. He was absolutely right that we as a nation, with a seat as a permanent seat at the UN Security Council and as a member of NATO, that therefore comes with a responsibility, and it is important that we stand up, and successive governments have done that and have been proud to do that. But I think the point that really struck home to me that he made was that we are pretty poor at explaining why this is needed and advocating the case for our deterrent. He is absolutely right that people out in the public, I don't think, are fully aware of the growing threats that we face and the need for it, in the way that people were aware perhaps in the Cold War in the 80s and the 90s. But I think it's also important that we do remind people, as he said, that we have done a lot of work to reduce the number of weapons globally. In 1986, there were 64,500 nuclear weapons. Now there are 14,500. This is also the anniversary for the 50th anniversary for the NPT, and it's important that we continue to redouble our efforts to do all we can to help that. Mr. Speaker, also there were, again, the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion mentioned the ban treaty, and whilst I respect her point of view, I have to say that it fails to address the key issue, which has to first be overcome if we're going to achieve lasting global disarmament, and that is the issue of the security context in which we are finding ourselves, and does nothing to increase the trust and transparency that we really need to see between those nuclear states. And last, just on the sort of feedback from the comments from honourable and right honourable ladies, the honourable member for Glasgow North West asked about her grandmother's Christmas tree. I will try and find out if it's still on board. And if it is, yes, if it is, it will stay there. Mr. Speaker, I think it's also important that we should remind ourselves of that significant economic benefits that we get. Our continuous at-sea deterrence supports thousands of highly skilled jobs in hundreds of companies across the UK. BAE Systems, with around 8,000 personnel, are key in Barrow-in-Furness, where our submarines are designed and built, and Rolls-Royce has over 800 employees in Derby. And in Barrow, who manufacture the plant that will power our submarines. And, of course, the Atomic Weapon Establishment employs nearly 6,000 people working on manufacturing, maintaining and assuring the UK's nuclear warheads, in addition to providing nuclear threat reduction services. I've already mentioned the support that it gets, that the Scottish economy benefits from. But today, I think, essentially, is about marking the tremendous contribution of the people who serve and to protect our country. Those submariners and their families who have done so much over these last 50 years. Many of the contributions made by members today quite rightly point out that these people are going away from home for many, many weeks at a time, months at a time, and that is a big commitment for them to make. But it is also a big commitment for the families that they leave behind. And we should all, I think, today say a very big thank you from all of us for the support that you have done in supporting our nation and in keeping our nation safe. I am glad that the SNP are going to push this to a division, because it means that this House again can show its support for what we believe is absolutely right. Mr. Speaker, I will finish by quoting Churchill's final speech to the United States Congress in 1955. Be careful above all things, he said, not to let go of the atomic weapon until you are sure, and more than sure, that other means of preserving peace are in your hands. Baroness Thatcher reminded Congress of that line when she addressed them herself in 1987, but she left out Churchill's next line, which was, meanwhile, never flinch, never weary, never despair. Mr. Speaker, Operation Relentless has been maintained by thousands of brave submariners since 1969. They never have.
Order. The question is that this House has considered the 50th anniversary of the continuous at-sea deterrent. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby.